Well, to no surprise, it looks better than the game from 2008. What's impressive is how far they twisted some of these areas while still remaining recognizable. In others, the fidelity is pumped so much higher that you can barely recognize what the room originally was. The layout can change drastically with new objects and even rooms added onto it. Generally, the more drastic changes are done for the better. They try to maintain the big, recognizable features that people remember from a room, but when they get off the range, it's typically to make an area feel more real and lived in, like the Ishimura now having a security checkpoint before properly entering the flight lounge. Other areas are hugely opened up and give you a better sense of scale of just how big the ship is. Though ironically, the increased detail has scaled down some areas. A good example is when you dive into the guts of the Ishimura to refuel the ship. It's smoky and industrial, but so dark it's like you're in some kind of void. The parts are huge and bizarre. There's what looks like a massive human spine just vanishing into the fog. Beyond the necromorphs, even the ship itself is a bit of an unknowable terror. The remake's detail is insanely better. The fog's not as opaque, so you can clearly see across the gondola and even make out the fine details of the ceiling and walls. It's not bad, and maybe they would have done it this way if they could back in the day, but it ended up looking surreal because of that limitation. Now don't get me wrong, I could do comparison shots all day showing that the remake looks fucking awesome. One of my worries going in was that the environments would have that Halo CE anniversary effect. You know, where they saw all those brutal surfaces and decided they needed to be greebled up by Alienware? That's definitely not the case here. I have examples like that where I enjoyed the mood more, but overall it's a massive improvement. The original has plenty of examples that were lower on detail that they probably didn't want that way. The mining deck was kind of rusted yellow. You still get the feeling of the area, but with new technology, you can now show the layers of dirt packed onto all the machinery. All of the surfaces and textures are now packed with detail. Their sci-fi setting is more realized, and the body horror elements look grosser than ever. Flesh surfaces actually look wet and reflective, sometimes having touches like bones sticking out. You have a much better sense of the human form being melted into soup. Not only does it look massively better, but when it came to the necromorphs, they tied it into the gameplay in a really cool way. You don't just shoot off a limb anymore, you have to tear through it. The skin, the muscle, down to the bone. This can slow them to a crawl when their muscles are torn apart, or skeletonize them. One of the gnarliest deaths you can get was getting your head replaced by a dividers. Now with necromorph peeling you could damage one and fail. It makes it even better.
Die sooner!
The huge variety of slasher models now adds a lot to the game. The undead's uniforms now reflect where they were dying inside in their job in the previous life. It was a great addition in Dead Space 2 and just as great here. Well, actually, even better. With the new peeling system, they can have different sections of hardened skin or body armor to crunch through, making you pay more attention to even your basic enemies. It does make distinguishing the enhanced necromorphs trickier than before, but it's a good trade-off. It also helps make some scares more effective, as figuring out which necromorph is actually playing dead is a lot harder with so much variety, and they ambushed me more times than ever. As a bonus, I like that some wear engineer uniforms and you find way more dead engineers in general, because the engineering suit has always looked fantastic, but it's scattered around more to make it seem more mundane in its world and you more vulnerable. Isaac suits themselves have a lot of new detail in their complexity and how they reflect light. They can freeze over, you can watch the ice melt off, and then there's the blood. You get a lot of blood on you. This is all welcome. It's hard to stress enough just how big of a visual upgrade the game is. That said, there are some changes I really don't like, and the first are suit related. I've always liked your starting uniform. The helmet looks like a death trap that was designed by a computer using survivorship bias. Like, how little can we spend on the metal for the face where most of our engineers will make it? The suit itself looks like onesie pajamas, except for they had to add metal to keep the dude alive. It's much more armored up now and resembles the level 3 suit. It seems kind of cynical, like people know who John Dead Space is, so he should look like that when the game starts. Though I guess that ship has sailed. Does Gunnar Wright deserve to have his face in the game? Definitely. Is it still odd and do I miss Schlubbier Isaac? Absolutely. I think people made this a way bigger deal since he does keep his helmet on most of the game anyways, but the new cast and story is something I'll get to in a bit. Anyhow, the other suit change I was baffled by was the military suit. When the Valor first called, I had one immediate thought. Is that fucking Spawn?
Would you know the devil if you saw him? Would you know his face, his eyes? Would you feel chilled in his presence?
How did they... What happened to the bulky murder machine?
Can you answer the question I've just asked?
I was confused by this one. I've been very tempted to frame one of the original The Stars Are Ours posters somewhere inappropriate. I feel no temptation in this one, the legs have been cut out from under it. I will say that I think I get what they were going for. See, Dead Space has always incorporated tons of ribbing into its visual design. The most obvious and constant example is Isaac's suit. It always looked like it was made to protect against space hazards rather than combat. It has gaps all over the place, which still makes him look vulnerable. Even in his nerd final form, he has a lot of exposed neck and chest and other vital areas. The military suit was designed to be shot at, so it has a big chest plate in the front. The undersuit areas look stiffer, like they're still armor but just a flexible, weaker version of it. It still has that ribbing, just much more plated. But maybe it wasn't as ribbed as it could be because again, ribbing is everywhere. The Ishimura itself is a giant space corpse with a huge exposed ribcage. It's also a fun way to convey that humanity is dying. Even the ships we're using to rip planets apart look like big corpses. But again, if you go looking, this design is everywhere. Guardrails, light fixtures, containers, the save station, the trams. There's a design document somewhere that says, why be straight when it can be a rib? The thing is, near everything you see is also a bulky industrial nightmare too. When it comes to the Valor, that's no different, but I can see how they wanted to change the military up. Instead of keeping them in bulky, combat diving suits, give them something more form-fitting. Still imposing, but technologically advanced. Like it's a kind of exoskeleton that contours perfectly to the body and helps you move and fight better. Which is all well and good until you apply that to the face too, and then it looks silly. There's a time and a place for Warhammer. I could see it working for some kind of infiltrator, like if it was a super tight, stealth-cloaking catsuit. For a space grunt, it's too much of a comic book villain. There were some visual bugs, and the last 2 chapters had random stuttering not tied to any setting I could find. Others have had way worse luck, so your mileage will vary. Those issues aside, it is an impressive looking game. There's a sequence so impressive, I would feel bad for showing it. So, onto the sound. When it comes to music, it's not the original composer, but it sounds just like the Dead Space you'd expect. Lots of tense, very alien-inspired tension music. Violin players have a seizure when necromorphs show up. You could pull some choice sections out from either game, and I couldn't tell you which was from which. That said, I did notice a lot that was new during the rising tension music. Some tracks with horns or deeper cellos stick out, kind of remind me of like the music in A Plague Tale. So it's good at maintaining tension until it gets too crazy, but Dead Space has always been like that.
Falling fast. If you've got liquid nitrogen, we gotta fix hydroponics.
Why? Keep trying to reach him. Mercer has come to I don't think he's done yet.
It's also worth mentioning they brought back the technique from the later games, where when you get a new suit, it's an event. In the original, the ambient music would just keep going, but in the remake, they give you that little moment of victory. Maybe the most significant change is that Isaac now speaks. This is something that affects the story more, but there's still cool stuff to point out here. For one, he delivers his lines differently based on how much health he has.
What's your status? Do you have the captain's rig?
Fuck me! Ugh. Transmitting codes now. I saw it, Hammond. A flying one turned the captain's body into another one of those things.
Do you have the captain's rig?
Fuck me! Ugh. Transmitting codes now. I saw it, Hammond. A flying one turned the captain's body into another one of those things.
I can't remember the last time I've seen this outside of an RTS or tactics game. To add on to the good ideas from Dead Space 2 pile, Isaac once again goes nuts when he keeps stomping. This is great because no one on the planet can deliver a frustrated swear like Gunner Wright. To capitalize on this gift, he has lines for when he's out of ammo too. When his tool stops working and he starts wishing death on the company that made it under his breath, that is so real.
Leave it to fucking CEC, you piece of shit!
Isaac is a man of the people. The ambient sound design is also very good and layered. I've got no complaints on that front. There are lots of fun new touches, like being able to hear when your boots' magnets are on in Zero-G. When it comes to enemy and weapon sound effects, like any remake, it's mixed around, but leaning on good. The necromorphs have a lot more variety in their sounds, but it can be less guttural and kind of silly sometimes. Especially in some scripted stuff. Less space monster and more being drunk and remembering you have a pizza in the oven. There are some sounds too burned into my brain for their own good, like the exploder. It was a shrill, attention-grabbing sound that warned you of the wriggling custard IED heading your way, which they sort of kept but more subdued. Again, faithful, not bad, just different. Others sound near identical or even better than before. Everyone will have their preferences, but I think there is one change that's unbelievably bad. When the new plasma cutter was revealed, it sounded bizarre, but in the final product it sounds faithful and gets weightier with upgrades. What's really been done dirty is the pulse rifle. Until the third game trivialized them, Dead Space guns were always eldritch terrors from the nightmares of Californians. A character in the first game gets a dodgeball-sized hole punched through their chest by a handgun. The firearms of the future are brutal and rip right through flesh, which is devastating to a person, but only slows down the necromorphs. The rounds going right through them don't bother them much, so you had to sever their limbs off with pure DACA. It also showed why Isaac was so successful by using space power tools compared to a loud killing machine. The rifle looks and sounds like it should be a world ender, but it's not even close to your best weapon. So in the remake, they made the sounds more reflective of the weapon's actual power, which is a good idea, but now the pulse rifle sounds like a joke. Weapons in the series look and sound more powerful with upgrades. So to show how bad it is, here's a fairly entry-level pulse rifle in the original. Now, here's the fully upgraded version in the remake. The rounds are slow, the stopping power is gone, and above all else, man, that sound is rough. It's no wonder the owners of these things keep fighting it. It does feel like a nitpick in the grand scheme of a game with such solid sound design, but it seeps into a detail I like so much about the setting that I can't ignore it. It's definitely fixable if they think it's worth the effort. I guess now's a good time to talk about all the other weapons and the gameplay changes, which there are a ton of. Overall, the new arsenal plays fantastically, and there were lots of good adjustments to pull this off. For starters, the bench upgrading system was overhauled. Every weapon has significantly more stats to improve, and 3 special modifications. The special upgrades can be simpler, like giving a weapon way more ammo, or an increased range or explosion radius, but they can get more exotic, like adding multiple bounces to the Ripper blades, adding damage over time to the cutter, or helping your force gun create a black hole. And you're not spaced out by empty node sockets anymore, the upgrade might just be a smaller increment. This makes it feel more rewarding compared to throwing power nodes at nothing for a while. To give a quick overview, the plasma cutter is still your best friend and workhorse. It now has a very funny melee upgrade that lets you Mike Tyson your enemies. The pulse rifle is at risk and needs guidance. It does keep up with the series tradition where it gets a new alt-fire in every single game. This time it's a proximity mine, though in reality, I mainly used it as the Dead Space 2 grenade launcher. The pulse rifle is the best weapon to... The flamethrower was a very welcome surprise. With upgrades, it's the second best in the series after Extraction. It's excellent for crowd control and weakening or slowing down larger enemies, and the alt-fire goes with that by putting down a divine wall of flame that Ramses II can feel the heat of. It's very cathartic. Good flamethrowers are rare in games. The old contact beam's primary fire is the new one's secondary fire. It smites down firstborns with a destructive fury that even Ramses II can feel the grief of. Its primary fire is now a continuous melting energy beam. Ammo for this is rare and expensive, but it's always a joy to use in the tougher enemies. Fully upgraded, you can obliterate most of your problems. The Ripper is still good as your not melee weapon, but the true appeal of it now is that, with upgrades, the blade can now violently and unpredictably ricochet up to 4 times. It has some homing on your enemies too, so you just watch the thing ricochet around murdering everyone. If you're not careful, it can even deflect back and hit you, though the damage is minimal. It's always worth the risk for the sick-owned zones. The Force Gun is still the premier knockback champion and Short King Eliminator. It's also become one of the game's most brutal weapons. Up close, it can rip a necromorph's skin off like taking a tissue out of a box. Anyone within about 2 meters of it is exiled right into the Bone Zone. The alt-fire is a gravity well that sends them into the Wild Ride. The line gun is still your mega cutter, no changes on the primary. They did change the secondary into a beam trap that's way easier to use than the old version. The traps can also be upgraded, and this is by far the most powerful weapon in the game. You could pretend you're playing Portal and drag a cube around. You don't have to, but with Kinesis, the line gun gives you the sweeping annihilation beams. Or sad. Having trouble with literally anything? Sad. Oh, a quarantine? That's cute. I've tried a lot on the Ishimura, and Sab is a program that works for me. It doesn't use ammo either, so I'm saving tons every week. It's firmly part of my lifestyle. Hell, you don't even need the cube, you can put this on anything. I get it's not for everyone though, so let's go back to the non-IMSIM brain stuff. You could play through Dead Space using nothing but a plasma cutter and be just fine. That's still true here, but the peel system adds a lot of incentive to switch things up. The Force Gun can prescribe a decade of proactive instantly, and the Flamethrower can melt the flesh right off the bone. So by switching things around, you can make your standard weapons far more effective. When the skin and armor bits are stripped away, you can get right into proper surgery. It's visually easier to see how damaged a necromorph is now, and it just makes the combat more meaty and satisfying. I did notice 3 aspects about the combat that were different, with one being a change and the other 2 being a definite step down. The first is that Isaac is more nimble now. Not quite on Dead Space 2's level, but it feels like an in-between of those. In the original, the camera's much closer to Isaac, and he's clunkier to play. The trade-off is, his movement had a lot more weight to it. The stomp is quicker, more efficient, and has fun character lines now, but the original had some real power behind it. A stomp that would make Edward Norton uncomfortable. Your enemy is on the ground and it's time to go to work. You see him winding his hip up to throw in so much power into it. It's not as responsive, but ideally the stomp was your victory move when the fight was over. This is tuned for active combat, so it has a faster wind-up and less power visually. The second game's was faster, but still slower than this, but it still maintained that energy by having a camera swing. So the idea behind the stomp is just kind of different this time. As for the aiming, it's a combination of the classic mode and the centered mode that Dead Space 2 introduced, and I definitely miss having actual lasers for targeting all the way down. Don't have much more to say there. Overall, the enemies have had good balance changes. A good example is the Pregnant used to be a slow enemy that you would usually take care of first, and now it's way more fast and aggressive. I used more stasis shots on them than ever. But when it comes to the slashers, I'm genuinely wondering if something is bugged. I was playing on hard since Impossible is just hardcore mode now, which is kind of odd, so this is as good as they get. They'll approach in a more creepy, stalking way often, which is cool. The issue is, they don't always speed up, and when they do, it's this jaunty skip walk. It's like they put stuff in a performance capture guy and that's how you'd actually run with extra arms on your shoulders. And it's slow and awkward to the point that you can easily run around them. Compare this with how aggressive they used to be. They have this animal fury to them, like every cell in my body wants you dead now. In the remake, they're more like slugs. Look at the time between one dropping in and then trying to murder me. That was maybe less than a second. To make up for this lack of speed, in most encounters, we'll drop another one behind you. This could happen in the first game too, but here you can flip a coin to decide whether to turn around. So my first thought was, okay, the peel system requires way more precision, they had to slow them down so you can aim at the part more carefully. Maybe I just wanted a higher difficulty? But on occasion they would do a jump charge at me, which was something. Then, loading up New Game Plus Plus to record something else, I saw one doing the freak charge. This was like a fucking Bigfoot sighting. Where do I find the habitat of this creature? Could there be more? Are they roaming free in other people's games and this is just some kind of bug? I'm not sure what's happening, but if it is intentional, I would love for them to bring the original Impossible difficulty back that has more aggressive necromorphs. Like, that speed with their new health would probably be horrific on a controller, so I get why it could be like this, but I'd like the option. And this game is extremely good about its options. Anything new I wasn't a fan of, like the Kinesis Indicator, I could just go turn off. As for how the game progresses, they added some outstanding additions. When you upgrade your suit, that unlocks more circuits you can spend nodes on, and this goes all the way down to the military suit. For the weapons, the special modifications will also open up new circuits, but you'll need to find them, and this is the best the exploration loop has been in the whole series. You always had to backtrack through the Ishimura, and now it's been opened up. Now you go through back hallways and elevators to reach the tram stations, and once you do, they're unlocked for your fast travel. If you want, you can walk all the way from the bridge to the engines, or just catch a train. It's not a loading screen either, you get to actually ride it, with all that implies. Oh god. You no longer use your precious power nodes to open doors, you have security clearance. This will increase naturally through the campaign, and as you revisit areas, you can unlock doors and containers that you couldn't before. You're gonna love that sound. You can find supplies, upgrades, new bits of lore and story. The exploration is rewarding, and they also work to make the backtracking engaging. The old 3D map has been completely reworked into a new, better readable form, so finding the clearance locked doors is simple and pain-free. With the map big and interconnected, I do wish we had the Dead Space 2 tracker for finding stores and save stations easier, but this is still a great change. The game world itself has dynamic changes controlled by something called the Intensity Director. Returning through an area, machinery might start breaking down, or the power's out and it's pitch black. Different kinds of necromorphs can be lying in ambush, and on rare occasion, there might be enough to enjoy a bonus quarantine. Sometimes it's just flickering lights and cultic whispers and the eldritch call of the marker. It keeps you on your toes and stops backtracking from feeling too mindless. It shakes up the game exploring and on replay. Besides the regular New Game Plus rewards, it has some bonuses in the form of a new ending to unlock, and a new variant called Phantom Necromorphs that show up. Even if you harness the power of paying, there's still just too much to unlock in one playthrough, so going back to fully gear up while facing new challenges and pursuing a new ending was immediately tempting. Even the Zero-G Frogger was completely reworked into the flying system from the later games, which is overall a huge improvement, especially in the new space areas. Though I do think some areas worked better in the old system, but also, I'm not going to pretend the Leviathan is some kind of high bar it had to reach. Stripping out the turret section was a big improvement and much more engaging to the asteroid section, but when it comes to the boss fight, they probably should have gotten rid of the turrets entirely instead of the weird half-mix it is now, but I get and appreciate how they were trying to keep it faithful. They added 3 self-pursued side quests to give Isaac some more agency, and following them up can change the dialogue in the main story. The reveals they can have are substantial and give you another reason to explore. Even with my issues, and the bugs that would pop up now and again, the moment-to-moment gameplay and exploring was a ton of fun. I have never clicked the New Game Plus button faster in a Dead Space game. Which brings us to the story, and if you know the broad strokes, they're all the same. Obviously, Isaac having a voice made him a stronger character. He technically had some commentary if you dug into the mission menu in the first game, but it was never anything substantial. The silence also gave it an isolated, clinical mood that this game doesn't have as strongly. But for this, I want to focus on the story and characters over that kind of argument. Like 2, Isaac is an engineer now. Him being the one to come up with technical solutions feels more natural.
Seeing you in the control room. Any news on the engines?
Yeah, but it makes no sense. They're out of fuel. The centrifuge is offline. We're tethered to a 4 trillion ton payload. Without the engines, it's dragging us down to the planet.
Can you handle it alone?
Sure. Fix the centrifuge, fuel running, and do a full restart. But you'll need the stabilizer order from there.
Standing by. Fast as you can, Isaac.
Daniels isn't answering her Rigley. What's your status?
I found a shock pattern used on the barricade. I'm heading back there now.
His delivery adds so much to the writing. There's a part where they're talking about being slowed down by ship issues, and Isaac points out it was intentional by the miners. But he says it in a way where you can hear the quiet pride he has in his coworkers.
Now malfunctions. Traps. The miner's way of holding the line.
It's a simple line, but how he said it gave more depth into what Isaac is about. Compared to just reading a line, which... oh man. I will say that having to act for a remake that's so recent and beloved does suck. People have direct comparisons instead of just your performance. The OG Dead Space cast were never the most incredible, in-depth characters. You know, Peter Mensah fucking rules, and I feel bad for someone having to follow that up. That said, a lot of lines are one-to-one, but they've twisted some things up in the writing more significantly. A lot of dialogue and writing is more natural, like cutting down on the cut off the limbs prompts and making them sound more real. At other points, they tried to add more depth to the characters, with varying levels of success. Out of everyone, I think Nicole was the big winner, which is probably who you want. You get a better sense of her job, what she was doing, her relationship to Isaac, and with her recasting, she does look and sound more like a senior medical officer with a stressful job on a massive corporate spaceship. Before, she came across more like a med student. They didn't expand on her much, even in all the spin-off media.
Come on, we've got to move quickly.
You got a boyfriend? You want to see him again, right?
Yeah, that about covered it. So this is our best example. The main issues are some writing that doesn't add up, some iffy casting, and some horrific direction. Here's a comparison of what I mean.
Are you okay?
Whoa, what the hell are those things? Is that the crew?
Some of them were wearing the shimmering uniforms.
They're the crew? How the hell can they be the crew? Look at them.
How can that be? They're already dead. Now, the instinctive, understandable reaction is to blame the actor for bad acting, but there are 2 additional things at play here. The first is that take had to be okayed, and there are parts of the game where she makes a good delivery. I did notice they were mainly in the audio calls. While the characters look more realistic, there's now something uncanny and stiff about all their facial movements. It's like my ape brain is noticing what motion capture didn't pick up, and it looks weird. I don't know if the original game actually had performance capture on the voice actors' faces, but a lot of it does look hand-keyed. The faces aren't as expressive, but the delivery is more emotional and less subdued. The supporting cast feels more real and memorable.
It's the only way off the ship.
Kendra,
No, Hammond! This changes everything!
just let me think.
Killian was our only way home. We're trapped.
No! I'm not losing two good people for nothing.
This more subdued direction just demolishes the tone of some sections. Here, we have paranoid, hyper-religious space doctor. He's fervently insisting he can help, but you don't know if you can trust him.
My name is Terrence Kyne, Dr. Kyne. Listen to me.
He's looking around in suspicion, he's hushed. I feel like he might help or he might stab me.
Dr. Terrence Kyne, the Ishimura's chief science officer. I studied the marker for the church.
I'm done talking to unitologists.
But the planet won't rest until the marker is returned. You can't leave.
Not even a hint of crazy. I feel like the worst thing New Kind could do is blow smog in my face trying to sell vapes in a mall. He's been toned down into seeming too genuinely helpful for what his character is supposed to be. I just found it harder to get into the setting of the story when the performances are so flat.
When they were turned, those units merged right into their bodies. Changed them. They're fucking fast, Isaac. Stay sharp.
There's more to go over, but I'm definitely going to get into spoilers now, so if you don't want those, go to here. Okay, here's the deal. Having Isaac talk has shifted everyone's roles around a bit. Starting with Hammond, he was the chief security officer and the boss. With Isaac improvising more, Hammond needs something else to do. He scouts around the ship at a point and gives hints about the marker, unitology, and horrors to come, which is good. It's what they've made his primary trait now. In the original, the rest of the repair crew is Mario and another red shirt who die instantly. The opening is a little slower now, which I do like, but the red shirts die just about as fast. One was still on the Kelly and not able to talk to you anyways and dies in an explosion, so it didn't feel that consequential. The more important one is Chen. He lands the ship, talks about getting crunk, and says the Ishimura is stinky.
Smell that?
Smell what?
Like something died in the air vents. Oh.
He still dies just as fast, and Hammond spends the entire game talking about how destroyed he is over Chen. Except, Chen is now also a necromorph that's actively pursuing him. The specter of Chen is everywhere. Where Hammond once noticed a slasher in an escape pod and went, oh shit, and jettisoned it, he has now lured Chen into the escape pod because he can't bear the thought of killing him. This ends with Chen pursuing him all the way to the Valor.
Chen? What did that thing do to you? Help me get him to the Kelly.
Shoot him! It's not Chen! Shoot him!
What? Chen? No. You're
It's worth mentioning we came onto the ship for that part, and that could have screwed everyone.
Get that Corvus! Don't wait for me!
Hammond no longer comes across as heroic, and the Chen story does nothing for me. Expanding the red shirts for the beginning is a good idea, but I don't understand why they didn't have Chen do more then. In a logical sense, Hammond knew him for years, and it makes sense that he's so disturbed by what's happening. And sure, the marker's messing with him too, but as a player, I don't know this dude at all. Like, even if he only makes it to chapter 2 or 3, maybe he can come up with an idea for the shock pad and medical. He could be helpful or bantering, just anything to make the player know and like him before this happens. It comes across as hollow, which is a shame because Hammond being this Papa Bear who hates losing his people is a good idea on paper. Performance aside, he's more passive and confused. With that said, let me go back to Nicole and Isaac so I can cover some positives. They made the very smart move of integrating the call from the beginning of Dead Space 2 into this one. Isaac pushed her to take the job in the first place, and now he's dealing with the guilt of it. He met her in the first place because she assists people in leaving unitology, basically helping escape from a cult. She helped his mom leave, and she seemed to be better until she pulled off a murder-suicide with his father while Nicole was on the Ishimura. The last time they spoke on call, he monstrously blames her for all of it. So the guilt doesn't just come from him wanting her to take a prosperous job. He's also desperately hoping that won't be the last thing he said to her and that he can apologize. Before, Isaac was guilty, but what happened wasn't his fault. It's still not his fault, but it still gives him something bad he did that he feels he can't make up for. That context is better for this game, and it makes Dead Space 2 stronger. Since the CEC and Church had filled the command staff with unitologists and told a select few that they were digging up a marker, you also see how this got her iced out by her colleagues who knew she helped people leave the church. Like Dr. Mercer. He's also expanded on. You see more of his evil scientist shenanigans, understand him more, and see that he's actually discovering the truth. Again, a lot of what he's doing flows naturally into Dead Space 2. As you'd expect, he's more toned down and less screaming fanatical, but in this one it's because he became a cult leader for a while, instead of everyone abandoning him. What he does is atrocious, but now he comes across as a Lovecraft villain. He's seen glimpses of the truth that are too horrible for you to comprehend.
Are you the reason the marker won't begin? That's it. Convergence is installed. She's meddling.
The new Mercer rules. The only change I didn't like was the original let himself be transformed to show just how devout he was. Unfortunately, things don't go down that way in this one. The consequence was, to contrast him, they made Kyne way too strong of a voice of reason. Kyne is a scientist and very religious. This whole ordeal is a trial for him, and he's trying to figure out what's happening by balancing those parts of himself. Originally, he can see that the marker is a problem, but conflicted on what that could mean.
I think that's precisely the point, Doctor. God's work.
I'm not so sure of that. We have to assume that the colony's problems are somehow connected to the marker.
You can assume all you want to. I do not. The marker is glorious and divine. You know that.
God moves in mysterious ways.
The marker is divine. We know this. Look, it'll be on board tomorrow. You can study it then. Put your mind at ease. At ease? People are dying. How can that be the transformation the teachings promise?
If they had kept the previous more ambiguous Kyne, Isaac's new motivations for hating unitology would have made the relationship a lot tenser. Instead, he tries to be helpful, and Isaac just tells him to shut up sometimes. That leaves Kendra, and this one is messy. She's both a covert agent sent in with a military detachment to wipe out any trace of this happening, and they have her overplay her hand, and also try to be more sympathetic. It's a weird combination, so let me lay it out. Kendra is an infiltrator, but a shrewd one. She wants Isaac more on her side, but doesn't want to sabotage the whole team. She needs them, but only plants a seed of doubt about Hammond.
They think it's of alien origin, but I don't know what the hell it is.
Really? CEC didn't know anything about it. You're lying.
Back up!
In this, she has more subtle plans, like pretending to be suspicious when the crew is pulling out pulse rifles, until she accuses Hammond of being a spy in great detail that alludes to her own plans, where she'd once go, I wonder where Hammond is. Now she'll call to say, I'm hacking the mainframe, I'm gonna find out the truth. Sorry I'm not dead, Hammond, I know you want me dead. And then Hammond's like, I miss Chen. Hammond is so clearly lost in his own world that instead this makes Kendra obviously suspicious. But they try to humanize her more when she talks with Isaac, like seeing hallucinations of her brother. She sympathizes with Isaac, claiming to also have someone else back home. They talk work jargon. Even when she leaves him to die, she sounds remorseful and says, I know you're smart and you can find another way off. And she seems to genuinely mean that. Now at this point, there was a second reason I had been confused. A background story was about a couple named Jacob Temple and Elizabeth Cross. It used to be mainly in the audio logs, kind of a homage to the couple in System Shock 2. Except now, Cross is still alive and helps you deal with the Leviathan. And then you don't hear from her again, you think. Who you thought was Nicole was Cross, and she thought you were Jacob Temple. I like this change a lot too, because it explains more of what physically happens that wasn't just a marker delusion. You don't have to headcanon was Isaac physically doing more, it was just someone else. Anyhow, Kendra cranks 90s on her. You get the same lead up with the marker, just less annoying use of kinesis. The hive mind still emerges on the platform, but then this happens. And I guess it's to make Isaac seem more noble, but she's been trying to poison him against Hammond all game, murders a much more sympathetic and gentle Kyne, sentences him to days, weeks, or possibly death aboard the Ishimura, and then zaps another colleague in front of him while they're fixing the problem. If you really reach, maybe Isaac wants to redeem her because then he can redeem himself, but it still seems to flow better with her being revealed as an Ice Cold operative and it was all a front. It feels more conflicted now, and shooting Cross was the last thing we saw her do. Maybe Isaac could have convinced convinced her this was the right thing to do and she puts the marker back, but it's too late and the hive mind is already out or something. Or a falling asteroid then knocks it into the crater. You know, if she tried to redeem herself in her last moments instead of leaving Isaac stranded again, it might have been more tragic, and instead, this doesn't come together for me. As a spectacle fight, I've always liked the hive mind. But this is another case where I wish the remake twisted it farther instead of being faithful. You still fight it on a platform, now it just has a trickle of new attacks. You get the same jump scare ending, unless you go back for New Game Plus. When you go back through the game, you collect marker fragments, and some are obvious, with some being slightly more hidden. When you assemble them all, the ritual is complete, and Isaac even gets new dialogue, such as the aftermath of the Kendrick affair.
She doesn't understand.
Damn it, Isaac! You don't know what you're doing!
I know. You don't understand the marker like I do.
This is fascinating because in this new context, Isaac comes across as psychotic. Like, the main game could have been how Isaac thought he was saying things, and New Game Plus was how he was actually coming across. The only issue with that is, her lines don't change. If she was cold in the main game and more pitying in New Game Plus, like she can't bear to actually kill him herself, it would show Isaac's perspective as truly warped and be a cool reveal. Instead, you can only write your fan theory and talk about how Ed and Nettie are actually in purgatory. In the new ending, Isaac's head is filled with marker, and the stage is set for Dead Space 2. Again, I'm not sure if this is the true ending, but it sure looks like it. Story-wise and across the whole game, there's a lot I wish I could pick out from the original and stick into the remake. It's still decently buggy, and iffy performance-wise, but as a remake, it's incredibly faithful, and if you liked Dead Space, this is absolutely worth playing. They kept a lot I didn't think would make it, made huge gameplay improvements, and added a lot of variation to make replaying it fun. If you never played any of the games, the first requires some tweaking, but is definitely worth checking out first. It's also cheaper, and will stay that way for a long time. I think the remake does have issues that they could patch or tweak, but who knows if they will. The first also has a different kind of atmosphere to it that this game doesn't. It also gives you a better, less flat version of some characters. If you only care about ripping apart necromorphs, the remake is the way to go 100%. Now I'm curious about where things could go from here. Will they make a DLC that recreates the Dead Space mobile story? Are they going to remake Dead Space 2, which is a golden standard for pacing and might not have interconnectedness work in it? I'm happy we got a good game, but while I understand remaking some games that are ancient and were clunky, I do worry about the floodgate opening for games that are perfectly fine and playable. I've seen how that went for movies, and I'm not sure other game remakes will meet this bar. I don't know. I just hope we still get high-budget stuff for new ideas. It's a worthy game. Give it a go. Maybe when the bugs are more on. I guess I live in the store now. Also, Valentine Grimm, who refines the captions and does translations for these videos, started out doing the original Dead Space video. So while not exactly an anniversary, I do appreciate his years of work, and he posts updates directly to his channel if you wait for those kinds of things. Come back next time for the Callisto Protocol. It has graphics. What is the worst science fiction or fantasy method of travel? Beyond the existential implications, the answer for both is teleporting. If it's limited or dangerous, it can be interesting, but when it's the main way people get around, Am I surprised the Ring video is still up? Extremely. I was so convinced the video would be gone in a day or so, I bought Vimeo Pro to back it up. Music is always the worst for claims, and I'm amazed the edits I made actually seem to hold up. I still wish I could have had full freedom on it, but that's just how it goes. Have I thought of doing videos on other media? I've been getting more tempted to do strange spin-off stuff like that Dead Space movie, but again there's the claim issue and I probably wouldn't want to put that on the main channel. I've got to put off thinking about it, there's too much going on already. If I was given a dream team to remake a game I've reviewed, what would it be? I thought I'd be more stuck on this, but the immediate answer is Pathways into Darkness. You get a dungeon crawl through an alien pyramid filled with eldritch terrors and horror, maybe with like 90s Land Warrior idea of a super soldier. That's a game I'd like to remake.
Surprised to see me? Gotta die sometime. Surprised to see me? Warning, revved up.
The Callisto Protocol has been having a rough time, to put it lightly. A spiritual successor to Dead Space with many of those core team members on board, that released in a rough state on PC, has combat that's still being tweaked pretty heavily, and is now competing against Dead Space the Dead Space, or Dead Space 23. Spiritual successors can love doing the, hey, remember that? Except now, instead of purely tapping into nostalgia, it's essentially advertising a different game. I can't remember the last time I've seen something like this. But that said, I'm not going to mention the remake much, especially since this game came out before that, possibly to prevent that kind of comparison. But the original is definitely in play, because if it wants to call back to the original trilogy as much as it does, then alright. Now, I did try to engage with it as its own thing. I played through it several times, found all the secrets, and even listened to the audio drama.
Revved up.
This voice is from a windpipe implant I got after a shootout on Ganymede. Keep talking to me like that, and you'll find out what happened to the other guy.
Wait, you had Michael Ironside and didn't put him in the actual... So it still has a lot to talk about on its own terms. Though, there is the PUBG connection to talk about, which I was not expecting. They said they got rid of that, but it's going to come up in the spoilers. That about covers all the background basics, so what's this game all about? Fortunately, it's pretty simple. It's a few centuries in the future, and humanity has colonized parts of the solar system. Most of the colonies are overseen by the United Jupiter Company, or UJC. The thorn in their side is a radical terrorist group called the Outer Way, which has been wreaking havoc. Most recently, its leader Danny Nakamura led a huge attack on the Europa colony. The population was massacred, and you got out just in time. You play as Jacob Porter Lee, a UJC cargo ship pilot who works aboard the Karen. Jacob's latest runs have been from Black Iron Prison, a former mining colony on Jupiter's moon Callisto. His contract has been so good that soon Jacob will never have to work again. His co-pilot Max thinks it's too good to be true and that something's up, but Jacob just tells him not to think about it. They're almost done after all. Until the Karen is boarded by the Outer Way, led by Danny herself. He vents his cargo into space in a desperate attempt to eject the boarders. The terrorists are now orbital Haagen-Dazs, but the Karen was damaged in the ordeal and violently crashes down into Callisto. Jacob survives unharmed, Max can now only get work as a Ju-On cast member, and then he dies. You're then treated to one of the most compassionate rescues I've seen in all of fiction.
One life sign detected. Continuing search.
Captain Ferris was sent from the prison to get you out, and finds another survivor, Danny. Jacob is still reacting to this when the warden calls and orders his arrest as well. And that's our title drop.
Hey! I didn't do anything!
Welcome to Black Iron Prison. Here's your complimentary health bar. And even though you were supposed to be here for life, you're going to be let out early. The prison is currently dealing with an unknown disease of the Tom Savini variety. So, get out of prison.